Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
It's so much harder when you are struggling to then kind of sort out your problems, which might be, picking up the phone to your energy supplier to say, I'm really struggling, or to your bank to say, I need a bit of help with something, or to a debt advice organization to say, I'm in a tough spot.
And actually, I think that's a real common experience, isn't it, for people, particularly given the last couple of years we've been through, that there's a sense of unease when you're not quite sure maybe what the next 3-6 months, a year looks like. And your finances, of course, play a huge part in that.
Lots of people are going through the same thing, which means that, feeling like you're not able to manage is going to be, unfortunately, a very widespread experience. But then that should mean that people, there's no need to feel ashamed about getting into debt or really struggling, because it is such a common experience.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
Hey, how's it going? Hope you're well. I've just cracked open the window because the weather this week has been spectacularly good right across the UK. It's amazing how much of a difference it can make on your own sense of well-being and mental health when you can get out and about. I find particularly either running or gardening. Gardening is my big one at the moment. And being outdoors just has a huge impact. I sort of feel itchy feet waiting to get outside. And if I get an opportunity during the day to grab a coffee, just to drink it outside, I don't know, it even seems to taste better out there. I hope you're well. Still difficult things going on in the world. Of course, the conflict in Ukraine continues. And in the week just gone, we've had the UK Spring Statement, aka the budget, where the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, setting out some measures that will hopefully make things a little bit easier for some people. But having done a great deal of research into the cost of living crisis, quite clearly this is going to be a very, very difficult year, at least for many, many people from a financial point of view. Big drop in living standards, one of the biggest ever generational drops in living standards as a result of inflation, which is rising above pay rise levels, is rising above universal credit levels, is rising and rising and rising, gone up to as close as 9% over the course of the next year or so, which is the equivalent of saying that something that cost £1 last year now costs £1.09. It means your money just doesn't go as far. And of course, a lot of people have had pay freezes or relatively small pay rises in that time as well. Really tricky times. Many people, of course, don't forget, were really struggling just before then as well. So this isn't going to be good news for them at all. There's loads to talk about on this, and it's a really, really huge issue. And of course, we know the impact that debt, money worries, general worries about where you're going to pay bills, how you're going to pay bills, where the next paycheck is coming from, and how long you're going to be able to make it last. It can be hugely impactful on your mental health, your sense of well-being. Well, to talk about this, I've got the Head of Policy and Research from Money and Mental Health, the Policy Institute, who do great deals of work in regard to this particular field. Conor D'Arcy is our guest on Mental Health Monday. And I'll signpost you during the podcast to their website as well, which is really helpful, but gives you a real sense of the links between money and mental health. And I started off by asking Conor about how established those links are between money and mental health.
It's really strong. I think people are pretty aware that if you're struggling financially, if you're worrying about how am I going to pay that next bill or what's going to happen when price rises go up, it can put a lot of pressure and anxiety on you. And I think it's the uncertainty about what's going to happen next, the worries about how will you find the money for that, and the things that you're not going to be able to do, the heating and eating trade-off that often comes up. It can really take a toll on people, and it flows through in lots of different ways. People don't sleep enough. That's not good for our mental health. It means that you might not do some of the things that help you stay mentally healthy, getting out to the gym or meeting friends, whatever it might be. And over time, if you're really struggling, if that stress and pressure is weighing you down, it can over time become a proper mental health problem, which needs more kind of hands-on treatment. We also see it go in the other direction, though, where people who are struggling with their mental health already might be totally unconnected to their finances. It's so much harder when you are struggling to then kind of sort out your problems, which might be, picking up the phone to your energy supplier to say, I'm really struggling, or to your bank to say, I need a bit of help with something, or to a debt advice organization to say, I'm in a tough spot, which again, it just all ends up in this really vicious cycle where once you're kind of caught in it, it's hard to escape.
It's interesting that I'd never considered that actually money problems might be a symptom of a mental health problem, not just a cause of? Because I think people might think, if you're saddled with debt and worry, then that, of course, might have a mental health impact. But actually, you touched on insecurity, being unsure. And actually, I think that's a real common experience, isn't it, for people, particularly given the last couple of years we've been through, that there's a sense of unease when you're not quite sure maybe what the next 3-6 months, a year looks like. And your finances, of course, play a huge part in that.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I mean, particularly with the energy situation at the moment, when, there was the uncertainty first around prices going up, there was everything with firms closing down and people getting transferred from supplier to supplier. And the communication wasn't always great from firms about what was going to happen. Some people's money is, stuck in old accounts, and trying to figure out what's actually going to happen next with the price cap and what it's all going to mean for your finances. It really just, that uncertainty can just almost be as bad as the difficult decisions that you then have to make if you're trying to decide what to buy and what not to buy.
I've spent the last week reading through various reports, from Cornwall Insights to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the New Economic Forum. You probably read some of these reports yourself, the Office for Budget Responsibility and the outlook for the nation. And one of the difficult things when we're putting together a piece of work on the cost of living crisis is you like to offer solutions, or you like to offer the good news. And there's not a great deal of good news out there at the moment. That the inflation situation, a pound last year is now going to be worth, £1.06, £1.08 to come. More energy price rises are on the way. The government support is there, but then you've got to start paying back some of the government support on the energy price as well. I mean, this is I think the phrase was the lowest reduction in quality of life for a generation and beyond as well. So we shouldn't downplay the difficulties maybe that some people are going to face on this one.
Absolutely. I think it is unfortunately going to be really tough at the moment. As you said, the government's done some things, and benefits are going up a little bit, which lots of people will be relying on, and that'll help a little bit from the start of April. But it's not going up at the same pace as price rises. And as you said, the outlook ahead doesn't look great. I think it's not a positive. I'm not going to call it a positive, but a lot of what we hear when people are struggling with their finances and their mental health is that it feels like an incredibly lonely experience, because you feel like you've messed up in some way, you've got something wrong, you haven't been able to manage, and it's all on you. I think what's really clear at the moment is just how, people shouldn't feel that way generally. We all, things go wrong, that does happen, and there is support out there. But I think particularly at the moment, when it is such a society-wide issue, you can really see how this is affecting millions of people across the country. And as we were talking about, in lots of different ways, from energy bills, the petrol prices, to just the cost of the weekly shop, that, lots of people are going through the same thing, which means that, feeling like you're not able to manage is going to be, unfortunately, a very widespread experience. But then that should mean that people, there's no need to feel ashamed about getting into debt or really struggling, because it is such a common experience.
I was going to mention that because, of course, when we talk about mental health, often the phrase taboo or stigma is front and center. And actually, people's personal finances and the way they handle money and talk about money can be, again, taboo, and there could be some stigma around it. And yet it's a common thing that we're all going through. I guess if we don't have those tools to communicate, that might exacerbate some of the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we've seen good progress over the last few years about talking about mental health generally. There's more awareness, particularly of depression and anxiety. I think there's still a long way to go on more kind of severe conditions. But I think that's definitely started to shift the dial on how people feel. But when it comes to money, it's, there's still lots of hang-ups and taboos around that. So having the two things together really is a tough one to unpick for some people. And coming forward to say, I'm struggling with debt and my mental health isn't great, can just feel like that extra step that's just really, really tough. So, firms, energy firms, banks, all these sorts of organizations, again, are starting to take that journey as well of being more understanding about how people can struggle and the impact that it has on their mental health when they, get the communications wrong. And we speak to lots of people with mental health problems who have received a letter from, again, say their energy company for an unpaid bill or an overdue bill. And sometimes the wording in that can feel so distressing, and the way it's put across just makes you feel like you've done something terrible and everything's going wrong. So what we speak to firms a lot about is making sure that there is really clear signposting to advice and help and support, whether that's inside an organization to say, call our specialist team, we want to help you, there is an offer available there, or if it's to charities like Citizens Advice or Step Change to say, if you are struggling with your debt, here are organizations who can help you to find a way out of this.
Absolutely. And we'll put some of the signposting to those organizations in the write-up to the podcast as well. I wonder, the resilience, again, a word that comes up regularly. I wonder whether or not there'll be a test of people's resilience, that your finances, are going to be squeezed because of the nature of what we're about to go through. But how we respond to that is why this becomes a mental health, issue. And something we need to be wary of. And I guess for some people, this might be a fresh test. They may never have noticed, such a drop in income standards for a number of years, although we've all had different experiences, particularly, again, in the last couple of years. But that resilience is crucial, isn't it? And we don't know if we've got it until it's in front of us, the problems and the challenges. And I guess that's part of the problem as well.
Yeah, and I think we definitely see people react in different ways, and people who've been perfectly able to cope in the past. Situations might be very different now. The scale of the price rises might make it that much tougher. And yeah, I think that having an idea of being someone who feeling like you're not someone who gets down, it's kind of just doesn't match up with reality. And I think that's why, whatever you're going through, knowing that like lots of other people are experiencing this as well, that it is a nationwide problem and that there is support out there if you're looking for it, I think is the best approach.
The office in headquarters, have you got like a series of sort of charts and graphs? So what are your that anticipates what we might see in the sort of coming weeks and months? So what is that sort of short to medium future looking like for an organization like yourself?
So in terms of our analysis, we're not providing direct support to people, but we have a research community of about 3,000 people with lived experience of mental health problems and often of financial difficulty as well. So we're checking in with them all the time to try and figure out where are the pinch points, where are people really struggling, and then to figure out what the solutions might be and what different organizations could do. So you mentioned government already. I think there was a big missed opportunity with the spring statement where extra support could have made a really big difference to some of the people who are struggling most. And while changing things in the national insurance system and the fuel levy, I think all those sorts of things do help. But for lots of people, particularly those who aren't in work at the moment, there just wasn't very much there. But I think, again, going back to what firms can do, energy firms particularly, I think in the immediate short term, but also banks and telecoms companies, water companies, anyone who's sending you a bill, there is loads that they can do. So we're always trying to feed the things that we're hearing from people who are really at the cliff face of this stuff, who are really experiencing it, back into firms to tell them, the sorts of ways that you communicate with people, the messages that you send out, the support that you offer, the telling them to get in touch if you're really struggling. That makes such a difference to people. So we're doing our best to try and take those messages and feed them into firms and make that difference for people who are really struggling.
I'm a huge advocate of sort of mental health in everything. This idea that no matter what decisions you make in life, particularly what decisions a government makes, that we should always consider the mental health impact. And of course, I think you've just made it clear there about how businesses, organizations, anyone who interacts with a member of the public can have that policy and should proactively think about that policy, because it has a direct impact on that particular communication. But then also, I guess, it delivers on a result as well. That if you're going to, if you're sending a bell, say, give us this now, or we're sending the heavies round, people might, disappear. You can't track them down because if you encourage them, a more proactive, set up a plan, whatever it would be, the result becomes a positive one, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. That when you've got piles of letters coming in, everyone, different firms chasing you, it's so easy to just kind of stick it all away in a drawer somewhere and not look at it and just disengage and just not pay. And I think you're absolutely right. When the message is out there that we want to help you, that it's constructive and supportive, people are just much more likely to feel like, okay, this is going to be manageable. If I ring them up, it's not going to be an absolute nightmare. There is going to be some kind of way out of this. So I think getting those kind of key points across are really important. I suppose the other group who have a really potentially big role to play here is employers as well. When they know, I think employer, workplace mental health, again, is something where there's been lots of steps forward in recent years. The pandemic has definitely kind of brought it to the fore as well. But when it comes to finances, I think, sometimes employers can feel a little bit awkward about talking about these issues because often it comes down to pay and pay rises. But I think, again, as we were talking about, signposting, getting information in front of people, and not underestimating the idea that actually have just any kind of removal of those barriers to getting help can just be a really big help for one person, out of the workforce.
I wonder, Conor, whether or not at sort of your office in HQ, you've got, given everything you've been through, probably thinking that that was one of the biggest ever tests of our sort of finances in all the things that came through the pandemic as well. I guess you'd have been carefully watching like inflation rates, and then you'd have seen gas prices. Was there a moment that you thought, oh, hang on a minute, this is something else is happening here? We're going to have to deal with this, because it's hit now this pinch point, this 1st of April, with the energy price rise 54%, increase £700, with a further, we don't quite know, increase in energy bills to come later on in the year. Inflation now, with the predictions hit, 8.7%. I think, at what point did you realize we were going to get to this almost perfect storm of problems?
I'm not sure that there was ever a single point, but again, as I said, we're always kind of sending out surveys to our community and trying to see how it matches up with, as you said, kind of inflation figures or wage rises and what's happening in different markets. And I do think we've just picked up on this sense from lots of people and increasing numbers of that anxiety around what is going to happen next. The kind of post-Christmas period, I think, was when people started to really pick up on the thing around firms collapsing and what was going to happen next, when there was more discussions around how much the price cap might go up. I think where our chair is Martin Lewis, the money saving expert, and he's been increasingly talking about running out of tools and not feeling like there's extra steps to support people beyond what the government can do. So I think it's sort of been a slow train kind of building up pace, unfortunately. And I think those stats you quoted of from 8.7% inflation really just is striking, and some of the biggest drops in living standards that we've seen in a long time. So it's definitely worrying times ahead, but I would say that there is support out there for people who are struggling. I think it is really important to re-emphasize that.
Absolutely. What are your fears about what the next few sort of months might hold in terms of the consequences of the cost of living crisis that's about to hit us?
Yeah, well, I think what we've heard so far from our research community is that most people are just about managing at the moment, and we've got a real mixed community, so lots of people in very different positions. I think people are starting to make those tough trade-offs now. They're cutting back on things that they would normally be buying. And again, going back to that point around what helps us stay healthy, it is doing those things like, making sure that the house is warm enough, making sure you've had 3 decent meals a day, all those sorts of things that people are now starting to make those tough trade-offs on. So I think the concern would be from a mental health point of view. People are the worry and the change to lifestyles really does start to become an issue. I think it's, talking to debt advice organizations, talking to banks, I think they're expecting to see more of the impact really start to come through in August, when the kind of the savings, the little bit of a buffer that people have starts to be run down by all the different price increases. And then that's when people really do start to seek support, and when stuff, payments get missed and things really get difficult. So I think that's why the early communication from anyone who can help, creditors, particularly employers, anyone else, to say there is support out there. If you're struggling, do get in touch with us. Don't leave it till you're about to miss a payment. That can be so helpful, because there are things that people can do, changing to different kind of different plans on your phone or your internet, or looking at options around heating. There is often support out there, particularly if you're in a low income home and you're receiving benefits. So that there are things that are out there to help, and I think people again just feel like there's nothing that can support you. But I think trying to kind of nip it in the bud as much as possible, to reach out as early as you can, just can make a really big difference.
It's interesting you mentioned August, months down the line. I think some people, and I think I've seen the stats from the ONS just this week, that look at some people are sort of leaning towards credit cards for a little bit. Those things that you kind of do where there's one of the measures, for instance, that the ONS have, that can you afford an unexpected payment of £850, I think is the figure that uses as a standard. Your boiler's packed in and it needs a major part, or something goes wrong with the car. And I just noticed an increase in the number of people who would just turn it, okay, credit cards, because that's what we've done before. And again, that's the thing where, okay, it works for the month, then you've got to pay it back at the end of the following month. And then, like you say, you get to August, and then you then really have to make a decision about how sustainable that is.
Exactly. And, it is often a real struggle to find affordable credit when you're in that position, and credit cards can be okay. And then, other people might turn to more expensive forms of credit, and payday loans and those sorts of things, which aren't as popular as they were, but are still out there. Lots of people using buy now, pay later purchases as well, which again are good ways of spreading the cost of something when you're struggling or when it's an affordable way to do it. But how that gets kind of recovered, and when people are being sent bills to pay for lots of different things, I do think a few months down the line is potentially when we might see some of this really start to hit. I think the government didn't take the steps that we would have liked to see with the spring statement. They've left the door open to doing a bit more, a bit further down the line. So I think keeping a really close eye on this and seeing how things are playing out, hopefully will help to kind of spark some action from them later on.
And can I ask, when you speak to sort of your cohort of people who are sort of sharing their stories, when we try on the program to sort of bust the stigmas around sort of talking about money, do you find that just there's a really open conversation about money? Do people go, I don't necessarily go around with your salary written across your forehead or anything like that? Probably not quite the case. But that must be an interesting place to be.
Yeah, it is. I think it's really interesting. So as I said, we send out these surveys, we do focus groups, these sorts of things, get people around a virtual table to discuss things. And the extent to which people find it like therapeutic is the word that comes up a lot. People feel like this is some of the first time they've been able to speak about some of these things, that someone has asked them about these things openly, and that they feel comfortable and confident sharing it. It does them the world of good to kind of get that out, to be able to share it. And again, I think it's just about realizing that even if, whatever salary you're on, whether or not you're in work, that people can really struggle and fall behind, and knowing that people from a whole range of different backgrounds can feel so stressed, so under pressure, so unable to resolve their situation is kind of one small step towards kind of easing some of those negative feelings and getting people on the road to recovery financially and mentally.
Yeah, of course. Moneyandmentalhealth.org is the website. You can find more information about the work that Conor and the team do. Moneyandmentalhealth.org. Actually, final question from me, Conor, is based around this idea that, from a mental health point of view, we can all be impacted by poor mental health, difficulties around our mental health. And yet money, we've identified clearly, can be a factor in triggers which can take us down a difficult path. And we're not all in it together when it comes to how much money we earn. And I guess this will be one of those times where we have to be so aware, don't we, that it's not just about the amount of money, positive or negative, in a bank account. It's about how someone then feels about that situation, how they feel about themselves and their worth as a human being, because we place so much, don't we, on someone's value based on what job they have and what car they drive and how nice their house is. We've got to be so aware of that in this coming time and in general, to make sure that we don't define people by that bank account balance, or how they or make people feel that they should feel a certain way about themselves, or see themselves as a success or a failure based on that amount of money.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we hear from people in such a different range of circumstances, different ages, different ethnicities, different places in the country. And the same sorts of issues crop up for everyone. It is tougher if you're on a lower income. That's undoubtable, and it can be really harder to kind of find a way out. But it is just something that is so tied up. The money and mental health just becomes such a vicious cycle when things go wrong. So whatever we can do, I think, to support people and make them feel like there is help out there and point them in the right direction, I think is hopefully a useful step.
Absolutely. Moneyandmentalhealth.org. Conor D'Arcy, Head of Policy and Research at Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mick.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.